Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Girl Dad Show. Today is another episode where we have a Girl Dad Talk, and this season 4, we're going to include a bunch of other parents that I have befriended and I talk to about this stuff anyway. So now we're just doing it on air, and we're going to basically approach a current topic that's been, trending in the media and or weighing on our minds, or things that we're talking about a lot. And as you have seen, we've done one about divorce and then one about college. And today we're going to talk about compound living or communal living. And so today I have my good friends Eric and Nis, who have also been guests on the show. So you can go check out their interviews if you want to scroll back to the previous episodes and their interviews and their deep dives into who they are. But today we're going to talk about compound living. So let me just start it off by kicking it off and sharing with the audience some of the pros and cons. And then we'll just start having a conversation about it. Okay, so compound living is trending really high right now, and there's a lot more people doing this. There's quite a few companies actually forming that are actually helping you do this as a service even. And it's really, really fascinating trend that's happening as, multiple generations of independence have now started to retract, and people are starting to find interest in multi-generational living, as well as living with people of like-minded values. And so the pros of compound living are that there's a built-in community support, and there's this ability to have shared resources and also create social interactions that are more values-based and driven because you can select it. Some of the cons of compound living are privacy concerns, that there is a lot of sharing going on and there's a lot less privacy, and decision-making challenges because you have to make decisions as a group and as a commune or as a communal group. And then the last thing is the opposite of individuality and independence, which is that you lose some of that individuality. I will take a brief pause. Eric or Nis, you want to chime in here on your thoughts on compound?
Well, I'll start. I've done compound living, and in some regard, continue to do it. In New York, we had a 4-bed, 3-bath, so there were 4 couples. So at times there were anywhere from like 6 to 8 people in an apartment that we lived in for 3 years. And now in Austin, we have a multi-generational situation. So my wife's mom lives with us. So, I'm obviously a proponent to that extent. I wouldn't do it otherwise. There's definitely
Nice.
trade-offs. So though, the way you kind of broke it out, the pros and cons, to some extent, it's kind of like city versus suburbs a little bit. I'm a huge proponent of living in cities.
I didn't know that you actually did it in New York. I have a million questions for you because there's 2 ways of doing this, right? Like there's one way where you basically buy out an apartment floor or like get all of your friends to live in the same apartment or floor together, kind of like a hotel lobby style when everyone's kind of in the central area. Or there's like things that are happening right now where people are literally buying plots of land, like 10 acres, and then building like 20 homes on them with like centralized amenities. But you
No,
were
in New
talking
York,
about,
it was a 3-story apartment with 4-bed, 3-bath, just a rare find on the Upper West Side that we got, and had 6 tenants or 8 tenants at any given time. And then I have in Austin, it's just a regular apartment.
so in the New York
So,
one though, did you guys go to it together as friends, or did you just end up becoming
mhm.
friends because of the proximity?
Oh no, yeah, friends I've grown up with, friends I went to college with, so I knew them for like 30 years. Yeah,
Oh,
20
so
to 30 years.
you're part of this movement. You have been doing
Yeah,
compound living. Oh
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
gosh, that's
This
amazing. So
started the movement.
this started the
Yeah, I don't know
movement.
quite about that. Definitely 25-year-oldness definitely liked cheaper rent. Yes.
So was that the motivator, finances, or
No, no, it was like they were my best friends, so I liked living with them, but it's way cheaper to split rent in multiple ways than to get a 1 bedroom. A 1 bedroom in New York at the time was like 4,500. I had a suite with like an in-suite bathroom for 2,200. So yeah, much cheaper.
whoa, that's crazy. And then how did you guys know which friends to invite and which ones not to? Like, what was that process like?
It's guys I grew up with, worked with, and
Yeah,
like talked to every day. It wasn't that hard. I'd been living with them since college. It's
it was kind of
before
natural.
that I
There was
had
not
a
even a
1 bedroom.
yeah,
Yeah, I had a 1 bedroom where we partitioned a wall. So one of my buddies lived with us there. So
nice.
my girlfriend at the time is now my wife in one room, and then we partitioned a wall, and he lived on the other side of the living room. So like we've never lived. I've never lived with just my wife. Even once we got to Austin, her mom moved in.
Wow, that's amazing. So you don't know anything different. You've always kind of been in compound style.
Yeah.
And so you kind of like naturally selected the group, it sounds like, because of just college and work, and it was just kind of a natural built-in group. How about decision making? Was there one person that kind of did the decision making, and then you guys got it, or was there like a collective, like same thing? You just kind of self-select everyone and says this makes sense. And then a twofer, how did you guys make decisions for the compound?
I was definitely the house dad, and my wife at the time, girlfriend, was the house mom with one of the other women that were there. It's a pretty agreeable group. You know, if there was
Yeah.
something we all had to go in on together, like a ping pong table, it was like a quick text message like, should we get a 70-inch TV or a 90-inch TV? And some guys like, I think 70 is sufficient, and we're like, all right. So you just kind of go by like whoever wants to commit the least amount. That's what everyone commits, right? So
Oh my
it
gosh.
it was a pretty agreeable group. I don't like I would there aren't I wouldn't just throw anyone into that mix. That was a group of like, you know, people vetted over the course of a decade or two. So, you know, a little bit different than just randos in a community.
Eric, do you want to chime in? I know you have questions because you've been wanting to do this for years.
I have no questions.
You have no questions. All right, let me say what.
He's
let me
just
say
like, yeah,
what-
that all makes sense. That's what I
Yeah.
assumed.
This is just going to be a big love fest of, you know, the three of us saying that everyone should do this.
I will say that I don't know if I could do it in an apartment style, just because I think I don't have that collective group that you're talking about, Nis, that I like grew up with, and you know, have that built-in subculture and those like built-in rules of engagement. Like there's things that happen when you have that level of osmosis built in, right? My cliques have adapted and changed with my chapters of life, and so I don't necessarily know I have that deep level of relationship with my friend groups. But I would be interested in doing a variation of that, which is like buying a 10 acre lot and building like 20 homes on it on half-acre lots, right? And then having centralized rec areas, like a centralized swimming pool, as community centers, centralized barbecues, and like, you know, homeschools. I'm very interested in that because I feel like you still get your independence by having your own, you know, four walls, but you're also part of an ecosystem of people that share common values.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a proponent of it. There's pros and cons. You know, we're planning to move to a condo, so what you described is like pretty similar to a condo. Again, I know it's not as intentional, like people leave the building, but you know, shared pools, shared resources. It's literally shared ownership of those resources and an HOA and all that. So, you know, I'm a big fan of HOAs, and we also bought 4 acres of land an hour west. I don't know that we're necessarily like inviting a bunch of friends to go live there, but the idea is that it will be like a communal area with you know, different activities.
It's awesome. Eric, I'm very surprised you have so little to say, because I know we have so much to talk about with this.
I find the concept very uncontroversial. Like,
Oh, really?
I think that, you know, you said pros and cons. I just don't know what the cons are. Like,
I think that people would say that it's weird.
sure.
I'll give you a con.
Yeah.
I pick my kid up from school. He wants to go play on a swing. I go to the swing set. There's a line. I feel like a failure of a dad. Why doesn't he have his own backyard and his own swing set? But you could extrapolate that out many different times. You want to go to the pool, but there's someone having a pool party. You want to do this, right? You have a lot less control over your environment. And obviously you also will have bad actors, you know, people that leave stuff in the fridge too long and stuff like that. So like, you know, if really close friends and they don't mind if you throw their stuff out, then like you're good, but that's not going to usually be the case. So there definitely are frustrations you don't have to put up with if you know, own the entire area you live in.
Well, okay, so let me approach it this way. Like, we're all going to live somewhere, right? And you're going to live somewhere, and that's going to be on a spectrum from like by yourself in the middle of the desert to like every single person on the planet living in your apartment. Both probably not really great extremes, but somewhere in the middle, right? Like then you go to like, hey, 3 people like living in an apartment, and then, you know, come in a step and you're like, okay, we got like 40 acres and, you know, like a centralized road or whatever. I think there's no question that when you pool resources, it gives you access to better stuff that you couldn't afford individually. That may require some sharing. That's why we have cities, right? Cities have access to all sorts of stuff that people in the country don't have. This is the first version of some kind of shared resource, communal living, blah, blah, blah. Nis, I hear your example, right? Like, you know, like let's say 5 friends all share one swing set. Well, yeah, maybe your kid has to wait in line. But if you live in like New York City and you don't have a swing set, you're still doing communal living. It was just funded by the city, right? And in that case, you still also might have to wait for a swing set, right? So the version of that where you have complete control and access to your swing set is like, okay, I buy my own swing set. Like in most versions of communal living, you don't have to share, like, let's say like your bed with like your friends, right? And
A
there's no
fridge, like a fridge would be a common example. Like there's a, fixed capacity there.
Yeah, I guess my point is that like even when you're living communally, like let's say it was so important for you to have a swing set, like buy your own swing set. Like
Yeah, but if you're in an apartment or a condo, you literally can't. Like I don't have access to a yard.
right,
So,
but those things are like the things that you can't do, like whether, for example, your condo building, like it can't house a swing set, like whether you like made the deliberate decision to move in there with a whole bunch of people that you know or not, like that constraint still exists. It's not a function of the communal versus non-communal. Like if all those other units were empty and nobody else partook in them, and let's say you bought all the units yourself, right? It's not communal, but it's still like the framework and structure of the building and the space or the land or whatever still exists, still can't have a swing set. So
sure, but the house across the street has a backyard with a swing set. You know,
right.
Could have bought that house. Yeah.
That is making a different structural choice about where you want to live.
Yeah.
Now, if you make
it's not about the communal versus not communal. Yeah.
That structural choice, you may or may not have neighbors. If you choose to have no neighbors, then it's all you. But like young, you have neighbors.
Yeah, I live in a compound in a sense, is what you're saying. We're already communal living, is what you're saying. It's just a gradient of communal living, is what you're trying to get at, right? Yeah.
The only question is whether you live in a condo community or like in the middle of the desert or in a subdivision like Young, if you have neighbors, would you like to either A, choose them, or B, not? That's the only choice to make.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. That's the only difference in compound living or not communal living. Yeah.
And so like most people share
there's shared resources too. Like even if you could choose all your neighbors, like you could all buy into the similar neighborhood, but not necessarily share any resources in your own land. So I think there's gradients as well of like, there's a big difference between an HOA and not living in an HOA, I think.
I get what you're saying though, Eric. And I think that maybe Nis, you've been over my house. Yeah. So, but like my cul-de-sac is super tight. Like, or we live in a larger community, but our cul-de-sac specific has our own text group. We have, our kids all go to each other's houses. Like they like knock on each other's doors. There's always kids in my house, like playing in the backyard when I come downstairs from work. Like it's very communal in that sense. And like when people like in the community, in the larger community talk about our cul-de-sac, they call us a cult. I mean, endearing or spiteful. I don't know what the intention is, but they reference us as the Nagel Court cult, right? Because we like are so tight and we know each other so well, and all of our kids know each other, and we all do things together, and so maybe it is envy, but it is a funny way of communal living. In a funny way, it is a communal living because essentially we are our own community in our little cul-de-sac. And the funny thing is we joke about like doomsday and if shit hits the fan, like how we're going to barricade the top of the cul-de-sac and we're like set to go because half of us have gardens that produce more food than we can eat. Half of us have solar, half of us have guns and weapons, and like half of us have like, we've already like mapped this all out. It's so psychotic, right? We're like thinking about all these things, but it is kind of a community. It's totally a community.
100%.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Eric. Yeah, so you're saying this is not a controversial topic because it's just a gradient of compounding. So it's just like taking it one step further and just making the decision to do it or not, choose your neighbors or not.
Well, I think everybody, like you make the structural choice, like do you want to live like in the country by myself or do I want to live next to people?
Yeah.
If you've made the decision, I want to live next to people, whether that be in a city or an apartment building or a neighborhood or whatever, you're in a community of some sort with shared resources.
That's
now,
right.
My view is, do you want people that you choose or people that you don't? And I agree that it is a weird or atypical choice to choose all your neighbors. That part is weird in the sense that people don't do it. And many people are afraid of making the atypical choice, right? It's totally normal to buy a house and not think about your neighbors and cross your fingers and hope they don't suck, right? But why would you, for me, I'm like, why would I not choose my neighbors if it's an option? Yeah. And here's the thing, like, Young, you bought a house. Turns out the house next to one of your friends does not cost more than any other house, equivalent house.
Yeah.
Right? They don't go, the realtor doesn't go, your friend lives next door, 20% tax,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Turns out real estate is priced in a inefficient-ish market. You're going to pay a price.
Yeah.
Like there's no greater tax or anything like that. So basically, choosing the house next to your friend has all the benefits of having someone close that you care about, someone who's value aligned, someone who enriches your life at a no dollar cost. You can share resources, so you actually win. Like I don't understand why people don't think this is the obviously better choice.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but I will say that it is like the idea of like being in like a cult, right? And as like, it feels a little bit too like sectish, right? Where it's like you're creating this like subgroup, and I think that's what the controversy comes from, right? Where it's like it feels weird. It feels like a religion,
just like humans. Like I mostly go to restaurants and bars with people I already know that I've chosen their company. Like I could go and sit at random strangers' tables and hope they're cool.
Yeah.
But I won't.
I think the gradient is a little bit more than like choosing your friends. Cause like, if you go to that WeWork model that they used to have, or maybe are starting again, that was like literally studio apartments that didn't have their own bathrooms. Like it was a shared bathroom and shared kitchen. Like that's kind of like dorm living. And in that case, you're actually not choosing your neighbors. I mean, to some extent, you're always choosing your neighbors by choosing to live there and the sorts of people that are going to be there. But like, that's definitely a form of communal living that you're never going to have in a neighborhood. You're never sharing your bathroom with all your neighbors.
I mean, there's totally gradients. Yeah.
Different people can choose like what resources they want to share, right? Like, and I think that's the part where if you don't know your neighbors before you move in, you're a total coin toss on whether you're value aligned, whether you'll choose the same things. But it turns out, Nis, like if you've known a bunch of people for a decade, you might be aligned on similar choices.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The one thing that I do want to add to this conversation, because it sounds like you've just summed it up into a very neat little bow and tied it off there. So it feels really simple the way you just said it. But I will say the one pro thing about the reason why I'm so interested in communal living and compound living is actually for child rearing. I actually like the idea of my kids being around people that I choose. And then, because so much of their development is nurture. And, the older they get, the more I realize it's not about what I say, it's about what I do. And so them picking up that like cultural like elements and of the values that I exude, they mimic it, they benchmark it, and they copy it. And so surrounding myself with people that are like-minded and or even more in the direction that I want to be like only will help them saturate that kind of development. I just feel like that's really powerful for me. That's a really big motivator and driver for me to like, and the interest that comes from doing this, right? I really want to do it for those reasons.
I think there's the choosing your neighbors, and then there's the amount of shared resources. I think the amount of shared resources, I would just kind of double down on why I like it a lot. One, you just get access to better things, right? Like we have a really nice pool at the apartment that I would never have personally. We have access to grills and more parking space and like a whole bunch of things that you just wouldn't get in a house, even if I picked all my neighbors. So I think like the shared resources that like for the frustration of sometimes not being able to use the pool or whatever is not that bad. It's still pretty good. Like we have a cocktail bar on the rooftop of the apartment. Like that's a great benefit. We, would never have that otherwise.
So dope. Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. I think the second thing is that it is also, I think, good for kids to, waiting in line for a swing is not the worst thing in the world. There's a lot of times you're going to have to wait for things and have patience and, be able to, coordinate with other people. And, if your first time doing that is in the work environment when you're 21, 22, that's maybe not a good thing. But if from like a young age, you learned like basic etiquette for how to get in and out of an elevator and how to, share resources with other people, how to like get off the swing after a reasonable amount of time. Like, I think that's probably a good thing. So, versus like being in a suburb. If you grow up as a kid, like that swing set is yours forever. Like you swing on it for 4 hours.
Totally. I will tell you, I mean, I'd love to hear Eric's thought on the child rearing side, but like for me, like my kids crave those social interactions. They love it when the kids knock on the door and the neighborhood kids knock on the door and they play, and it's also kind of interesting too, because we've been encouraging them to go when they're like feeling antsy. We're like, go. And I don't know if this has nothing to do with communal living, but they're like a little hesitant to go outside of the house, which is kind of interesting. So they won't go, but they're super excited when the kids come. And but it is really nice, right? There's something very awesome about like, like everyone's like, hey, I'm hungry, and then we just feed all the kids. Like there's something really cool about that for me, and I don't know how to explain it or put my thumb on it, but I grew up like that. Where my neighbors, if my mom and dad, my dad was, a typical immigrant story where he had a small little liquor store and we were trying to figure it out. And so there was a lot of times where we like had the neighbor kind of communal living thing where things would happen and you were trying to build up a small business and you'd have to have shared resources. And you kind of had that like auntie uncle thing, where like some of them were actual family and some of them weren't, but they would all kind of like we'd all take care of each other. And I don't necessarily know if like that's what I want per se for my kids, but I do enjoy it when it happens, when like the neighborhood kids come over and I can like feed them, or they can join in on things, or if they can express their needs and I can provide for them like I'm a parent. It's like it makes me feel really good, and it makes me feel like I'm teaching my kids cool core values and giving them good core memories, right, of what family and bond looks like.
Yeah. Agree with all of that.
All right. Well, if there's, let me go around.
We need to get someone who's like, I hate neighbors of all kinds.
I know.
No,
I should have.
I think that's reasonable, right? And I think this again goes to two parts, right? Nis, you're right. Some people will say, I hate neighbors. So I think the important part is like dividing this question into two parts, which is like sort of like structurally, what kind of community do you want to live in, independent of who the occupants are. And then two, who are the occupants, right? So you can choose I am the only person with 100 miles, and then the occupant choice becomes moot. Or it can be like, no, I want to live somewhere where there's like 10 homes and, we share these resources. And then it's like, okay, we choose the homes. Like, y'all don't share kitchens, but you share like roads and lighting and whatever. And whether it's part of the HOA, like an HOA is just like, HOAs exist because it's a way to create a governing body for a bunch of people who are strangers, right? Communities pre-HOA existed where people knew each other, they had conversations, they got together, and they just didn't need like governance in the same way. It was like, it happened sort of organically, or, like in your example, you're kind of like the house dad. There's the house dad. And the problem is when you have a bunch of strangers that get together, you still need a house dad. Somebody who's going to like be the last person, whether it's the HOA president or there's a committee or a third party organization, decisions have to be made. And because strangers who come together haven't opted into that, like they buy into a set of bylaws, right? And I'm like, I would like to choose those.
Yeah, that's really a good point of view on it. I think that the one thing I will say about the HOA and the communal living is, the whole governing body is that I think the other aspect of it is because of the financial ramifications of doing things inside of your home, right? And that's a lot of it too. Is like that governing body had to come because of financial like assets of your house and the impact that it can have on your livelihood. I'm not entirely sure. There's some of those aspects as well too, but I also think that it's really, really important to note that some of these things are not just about like being with your friends and neighbors, because the story that I want to share is like when I think I like people. That's the thing too. For example, my brother-in-law owned a condo that he lived in downtown San Jose, and it had a huge there's a ton of condos in there. He moved out and I rented it from it when I graduated from college. So I graduated from San Jose State and I rented his condo because he got married to my sister and they moved and bought a house, right? My sister and him came to visit one time, and my sister made a comment. She's like, you've been here like 9 months and you know everybody in the condo. Ryan's lived here for 6 years and he knows nobody. And she's like, what the heck is going on, right? So I think by default, I'm also wired to live in communal living, right? I like that aspect of it. And so there are people that want that kind of network and community.
The frequency of encounters is just like much higher. Yeah.
That's right. And it's like, so the same person, like my brother-in-law lived in that place for 10x more time than I lived in there. And he literally met maybe 1 or 2 people. I've lived there like 5 or 6 months and I knew like hundreds of people. Do you get what I'm saying? So like, it's just a different, you also got to kind of put into consideration the type of person that's going to do this too, because I think there are people that naturally like it or want it or thrive in it. Cool. Awesome. Anyone else want to say one more thing before I close this out?
I want to give the counterpoint, right? So
Okay.
I think there's a separation. Like, again, I'm saying like you choose where you live and whether you're with people. I think that's choice, right? And the second one is whether you choose who those people are. I think the strongest arguments, again, like I'm not saying that people should all live near people. I'm not saying people should all live in a community. I'm just saying that from my perspective, if you're choosing to live in a community, you should also choose the people that I mean, there are benefits to choosing the people that come with you and almost no drawbacks. There are drawbacks. These are the drawbacks. One, like, it's harder, right? Like, if the three of us decided we wanted to go live together, what it takes is like coordination. We have to make that choice at the same time.
Totally.
Right? And that friction, I think, is one of the main reasons why it does not actually happen, right? So there's A, the coordination. B, there's the fact that realistically, once you get to like our age, there are other factors, like, do you have buy-in from your spouse? Are your kids like at a point where they're going to elementary school or middle school at some sort of transition period where it's not convenient to move? So I think there's these like structural reasons why people don't choose their neighbors. And then there are some other ones that are like, for example, if I do really weird stuff and I don't want you to know that, then I would rather have, right? I do think there are reasons why some people prefer like anonymity or holding people at a distance. And if that's you, then, you know, you can still live in a community, but maybe you want a community of strangers. That's
Totally. I think that's my brother-in-law, actually. Like, he likes community. He likes being able to like host and serve, but he's just an introvert. So he'd prefer to have his own space, but he likes to be in that community. So it's not like he's non-communal. It's just a different gradient, right? And he created his own gradient of it.
Yeah.
But that's actually really, really good point. I think that's actually very correct. I'm going to wrap it up.
I'll end with
go ahead,
one thing, because there's a thread going viral on Twitter right now, so I gotta comment on it. This guy like did this whole post about how he's moving from Texas to Raleigh, and
Cool.
you know, you read into it, he's complaining about traffic, a lack of culture, this, that, the other thing, and then he's moving to like downtown Raleigh where he gets all these things, and then like at the end of the post, you realize like, okay, he's in a suburb of Dallas. I'm just kind of like, well, you picked a suburb of Dallas. I think Dallas is probably the least cultured city in the entire country.
Yeah.
And then you picked a suburb of it.
Yeah.
It's just like,
what did you expect?
You did. It's the meme of the guy putting the stick in his own bicycle. Like, why'd you do that? Like, if you were looking for culture and not traffic, I would not move to the suburb of Dallas. Like, you kind of did. So I think there's an element of not everything is for everyone, but like, you know, if you do want high frequency encounters and you want like-minded people, don't go live in a state that's diametrically opposed to what you believe in and in a like deep suburb, right? So I think
it's crazy that happens so often. It's so funny. People don't do the discovery work or the deep thoughts on like what they actually want. And I think that Eric here has obviously thought about it a lot, because he cut through the fat really quickly here and basically broke it down into two subset questions that you have to ask yourself, because essentially we're already communal living. Yeah, it's a good conclusion. I like it. Thanks for sharing that anecdote. And I think that's a good point. Yeah, you have to figure out what you want before you actually do it. And then once you have it, we're already technically doing it. It's just a gradient of. So in conclusion, are we going to go live together, guys?
I'm ready. I mean, I really honestly think for people like us, spousal buy-in is the hardest part.
Yeah, I agree. My wife thinks it's super weird. I'm not gonna lie, Eric. I've already pitched her like.
She doesn't think it's weird to have neighbors, and she doesn't think it's weird.
I know. Stop getting so animated. I'm trying.
It's weird that it's definitely atypical to make the decision together, right? And that's why I think there's friction. I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep working on her though. Let's make this happen. Let's make a dream a reality. It's gonna be amazing. All right. Thank you, gents, for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your points of views, and look forward to the next one. And thank you again for tuning into the Girl Dad Show.